dass wir das hier unterstützen können und dass das hier seit 9 Jahren so erfolgreich läuft und dass ihr das so früh auf das Thema gesetzt habt und dass das Thema durch diese Initiative von Graef Rechtsanwälte auch mit der Hochschule verbunden wird. Dafür ein herzliches Dankeschön und ich wünsche Ihnen einen spannenden Nachmittag, viele neue Erkenntnisse zu diesem Thema und hoffe, dass Sie sich hier wohlfühlen. So, jetzt geht es gleich schnell weiter. Vielen Dank.
Ja, lieber Herr Landgrebe, vielen Dank für die freundlichen Worte und für die Begrüßung. Mein Name ist Leiter, ich leite in Hamburg das Amt Medien. Lieber Herr Graef, lieber Herr Rauda, auch an Sie vielen Dank für die Einladung und für Ihre Initiative. Die Bucerius Law School und der Medienstandort Hamburg haben eine ganz besondere Verbindung. Hier werden die wichtigen Konferenzen Hamburgs geboren. Das ist Ihre Konferenz, die heute zum 9. Mal stattfindet. Das sind aber auch Konferenzen wie Online-Marketing Rockstars, die auch hier in diesem Raum gegründet und aus der Taufe gehoben worden sind. Und insofern, glaube ich, stehen Sie da in guter Tradition und ich bin Ihnen sehr dankbar dafür, dass Sie diese Konferenz und auf dieses Thema Gaming hier frühzeitig gesetzt haben. Ich darf Ihnen allen, liebe Teilnehmerinnen und liebe Teilnehmer, die ganz, ganz herzlichen Grüße von Herrn Senator Dr. Broster ausrichten. Er wünscht Ihnen heute einen spannenden und angenehmen Tag. Kann leider nicht bei uns sein, aber auf diesem Wege also herzliche Grüße auch des Senats hier in die Runde. Die Games-Industrie ist Pionier und sie ist Vorreiter der Digitalisierung. Und in kaum einer anderen Branche sind wirtschaftliche und kreative Erfolge so eng mit der Digitalisierung der Inhalte, der Vernetzung und des Vertriebs verknüpft. Und Games sind ein ganz wesentlicher Treiber der Transformation der Medienbranche insgesamt. Daher sind die Kooperationen zwischen der Computerspielbranche und den relevanten Unternehmen der Medien-, IT- und Kreativbranche von großer Bedeutung und zwar weit über die Unternehmen der Gamesbranche hinaus. Sie alle wissen, Hamburg ist gleichermaßen traditionsreicher und hochinnovativer Medien- und Digitalstandort und bietet hervorragende Rahmenbedingungen. Rund 4000 Menschen arbeiten in Hamburg inzwischen in der Gamesbranche. Und 3 der 5 wichtigsten Online-Games-Unternehmen wurden hier am Standort gegründet und sind hier immer noch aktiv. Und das ist wichtig für Hamburg, silos aufgebrochen und die Chancen, die sich daraus ergeben, gesehen und genutzt. Dementsprechend ist Gamecity Hamburg, auch einer der Veranstalter, die wir hier auf dem Logo sehen, immer auch Bestandteil der übergreifenden Standortinitiative von Next Media Hamburg gewesen. Mit Next Media Hamburg haben wir in Hamburg eine Initiative geschaffen, die die Medienunternehmen auf dem Weg der digitalen Transformation an der Schnittstelle zwischen Content und Industrie begleitet und vernetzt. Und mit Next Media wenden wir uns an alle Medienmacher, deren Geschäftsmodell durch den digitalen Wandel berührt ist. Das umfasst Verlage, das umfasst Musikproduzenten, Werbeagenturen, Designerinnen und Designer, Fotografen und Fotografinnen, Social-Media-Agenturen, Radio, TV, Film, Public Relations und Games hat aufgegriffen und wir haben die Initiative Next Reality ins Leben gerufen, denn Next Reality-Anwendungen sind in Hamburg wichtig. Wir haben mittlerweile eine kritische Masse von Unternehmen erreicht und ich glaube, wir können schon sagen, dass wir ein selbsttragendes Ökosystem auch an dieser Stelle in der Stadt haben. Es gibt starke Forschung an allen Hamburger Hochschulen und es existieren eine Vielzahl von etablierten Unternehmen und Startups, die diese Techniken einsetzen und nutzen. Und die Startup-Szene in Hamburg ist vital an dieser Stelle. Wir wollen die Startups mit der Medien- und Digitalbranche, mit den alten Schulen in Hamburg alle an das Glasfasernetz angeschlossen und zwar bis in die Klassenräume. Und das ist einmalig in Deutschland, bis auf die Insel Neuwerk, da gibt es auch eine Grundschule, sind wirklich alle Schulen am Glasfasernetz. So, und das ist natürlich Voraussetzung dafür, dass wir auch digitale Inhalte an die Schulen bringen können. Und das ist jetzt der nächste Schritt, da müssen sich alle auf den Weg
Originalfilmen bezieht sich das insbesondere noch aus dem Postproduktionsbereich, also im VFX. Aber ich glaube, auch hier, damit das noch vorgestellt bekommen, zeigt das auf sehr, sehr spannende Weise. Deshalb freue ich mich auf den Nachmittag und darf am Ende auch nochmal alle ganz herzlich im Namen der Filmförderung am Schleswig-Holstein einen tollen Tag mit tollen Gesprächen, tollen Inhalten und ja, einen wunderschönen Tag wünschen. Vielen Dank und vielen Dank auch nochmal Graef, Rauda für die Organisation und genau, danke.
Moin Moin. Ich möchte euch herzlich willkommen heißen, auch im Namen der Gamecity, aber nicht nur euch, die ihr heute hierher gekommen seid, sondern auch den tausenden Zuschauern, die jetzt an ihren Smartphones online vor dem Monitor sitzen. Das ist heute für uns eine kleine Premiere. Wir streamen nicht nur auf Facebook, sondern das erste Mal parallel auch auf Twitch und auf YouTube. Und im Nachhinein könnt ihr das Ganze dann auch noch auf YouTube zusammengefasst euch nochmal angucken. Die tollen, spannenden Vorträge, die wir heute haben. Und ich glaube, auch daran erkennt man mal wieder ganz deutlich, die Games-Branche ist einer der Innovation Leader in ganz vielen Bereichen, wo wir versuchen, immer neue Technologien aufzugreifen und die massenmarkttauglich zu machen. Die Gamecity, eine Folie weiter, ist das Branchennetzwerk der Hamburger Games-Unternehmen. Wir vertreten die Interessen der Hamburger Games-Unternehmen, aber sind natürlich auch Ansprechpartner für alle Unternehmen, die gerne in den Kontakt mit der Games-Branche treten möchten. Auf euren Sitzen findet ihr den aktuellen Gamesmarkt, Medienpartner. Dort findet ihr auch diesen tollen Firmennetzplan mit rund 70 spannenden Games-Unternehmen aus der Stadt und auch das aktuelle Magazin der Handelskammer, ebenfalls ein Medienpartner mit einer Titelgeschichte zum E-Sport-Standort Hamburg. Hamburg wird ja wahrscheinlich in naher Zukunft die erste deutsche Stadt sein, die eine eigene E-Sport-Arena haben wird. Auch ein ganz spannender Bereich, wo extrem viel zurzeit in Bewegung ist und passiert. Und natürlich versuchen wir uns als Gamecity auch dort aufzustellen mit Games. Games und Gamification, Schwerpunkt VR und AR, auch ganz spannende Sachen. Sprecht mich an und ich freue mich.
Ja, guten Tag, es bleibt mir gar nicht mehr so viel zu sagen nach den vielen Vorreden. Ralf Graef ist mein Name. Play the Future of Games in Film. Wir beobachten es in der Tat seit vielen Jahren, dass die beiden Welten zusammenrücken. Schon vor 9 Jahren hatten wir sogar bei der Auftaktveranstaltung das Thema, was kann die Games-Industrie von der Filmbranche lernen, haben dann gemerkt, so einfach ist es nicht. Es ist eine eigenständige Industrie, die eine stolze und ein ganz eigenes Produkt lässt sich eben nicht einfach übereinander legen. Wir beobachten eben auch immer weiter, wie gerade die Filmproduzenten frühzeitig versuchen, mit den Gamern zusammen schon vom Start weg eben die Projekte zu entwickeln, weil wenn man irgendwann das nur als Abspielplattform benutzt und sagt, könnt ihr mal ein Game machen, wir haben jetzt gerade einen Film fertig, so funktioniert das nicht. Und das ist eben keine reine Werbeplattform, wenn man noch ein Game an einen Film dranhängt. Aber insofern heute wirklich sehr spannend für uns, ein Herzensprojekt und danke auch lieber Jan Asmus für den Hinweis auf VFX, wenn man sich so Filme anguckt wie Gotthard, der Projekt Create Converge. Und ein weiteres großes Dankeschön geht an den Amazon App Store. Die sind unten vertreten mit Mitarbeitern, die auch Fragen von Entwicklern und Publishern gerne beantworten, über sozusagen Trends und die neuesten Features Auskunft geben. Dort werden auch ein paar Amazon Fire Sticks verlost. Und zur Einstimmung vor 10 Tagen auf der Games Developer Conference in San Francisco wurde ein neues Feature vorgestellt, das Entwicklern und Publishern die Möglichkeit gibt, die Nutzeraktivität in Spielen zu erhöhen. Und den haben wir Ihnen mitgebracht, freuen sich auf einen kurzen Clip aus San Francisco, bevor es dann mit dem inhaltlichen Programm losgeht.
Hello there, developers. Today we're going to talk about Amazon Game On, how to set it up, and all the great ways you can use it for your games. Amazon Game On is a brand new cross-platform competitive gaming service for developers. With Game On, you can easily integrate competitions and real-world prizes fulfilled by Amazon into any game on mobile, PC, or console. Amazon Game On makes it easy for developers to create and manage services essential to competitive gaming. These are setting up competitions and defining and delivering real-world prizes fulfilled by Amazon, managing device registration and player authentication, including fraud prevention and identifying abuse, and finally, Game On also handles scorekeeping, leaderboards, leagues, entry requirements, and of course, prize fulfillment. Amazon Game On is built on top of Amazon Web Services cloud infrastructure, and like all AWS services, Game On is scalable, robust, and reliable. Game On exposes a set of REST APIs that are accessible from your game's backend or directly from client devices. Amazon Game On's REST interface makes it platform and language agnostic. Any device or operating system capable of communicating over HTTPS can use Game On. Since there's no custom SDK or library necessary, you can use whatever tools work for you in whatever language you like best. So, let's get you started with Amazon Game On.
Okay, dann bleibt mir Problem hätte in dem Bereich, dann würde ich zu ihm gehen. Ich gehe auch zu ihm nicht nur mit diesen Themen. Und Autor des ersten Gesamtwerks, das Recht der Computerspiele. Christian Rauda, vielen Dank. The floor is yours.
Vielen Dank. Mit rechtlichen Themen werden wir uns heute ja nicht beschäftigen, sondern mit sozusagen den Themen des Business. Und ich möchte jetzt sozusagen ins Englische wechseln, weil wir einen Keynote-Speaker haben, der nicht aus Deutschland kommt. Actually, in the last couple of years, we had the opportunity to have many speakers from European countries here at Hamburg Games Conference. We had people from Spain, from Italy, from the UK, and from Netherlands. And today you're actually in for a treat. Flown in from Copenhagen, where we will welcome a renowned expert in the field of games and film, a speaker at numerous conferences. He obtained a master's degree in film and media science from the University of Copenhagen. He produced more than 35 games for advertising and entertainment and learning purposes, and he's now head of the Department of IP Development at Nordisk Film Games, which has invested in a couple of indie game developers, actually 4 companies in the last year. He manages the intellectual property associated with Nordisk Film and Games, and in addition he is an independent consultant for the game and media industry. Please give a warm welcome to Christian Fonnesbech.
Thank you. It's working. Thank you very much for having me. As the very professional introduction said, my name is Christian Fonnesbech. Before I start, can I just ask how many here are working as game developers? Just so I can get to know my audience a little here. Okay, and publishers? 2, right? Academics associated with the gaming industry, and interest organizations, government, that kind of thing? Okay, thank you very much. So now that I know who I'm speaking to, I can start speaking. So, build your IP for all media. Mr. Redelfs and I agreed on this, and it is apparently a growing concern for pretty much everybody. So as the head of IP development at Nordisk Film Games, what we're aiming for is to build global entertainment franchises. But we're starting with games. So that means basically that you take the game and you either the developer does it themselves or you work with them to develop it into the point where it can cross to all other media. So what is an intellectual property? I'm sure most of you know this, but it's the intangible creation of the human intellect. So it's the stuff you think. You're not coding it. You are visualizing it for yourself, perhaps drawing it. It's the characters, it's the storyline, it's the visual style, but at the point where it can be protected by law. So why would you want to do something like that? Well, for Egmont, as you can see down here, the mission of the whole conglomerate is to bring stories to life. So intellectual property is, of course, a way to assign value to the elements that go into a story. So that's what it's all about. Basically means you get a long life in the market. We're talking a franchise. And it means we get multiple revenue streams. But if you're a developer, then why would you do it? Well, if you have an IP and an intellectual property, it's something that stays in the market for a longer time. It's not just one game. You can make many games with the same character, with the same stories, or with new stories, and so on. That means you can build loyalty over time, and you can do something that's very difficult if you're just producing one game. You can do long-term planning for your company. And as an investor, of course, that is pretty interesting. So building an IP as a developer is really a way of increasing the potential value of what you're doing, which will bring you a higher valuation by the investors because the end game suddenly goes out on all media and not just on one. And of course, that gives more interest from investors. At least it does from Egmont. So the big question is, how do you do that? And that's what I'm going to answer over the next 26 minutes. So I'm going to go through 4 small chapters. The first one is, who is Egmont and who am I and why are we doing this? And then I have 6 tests for your intellectual property to determine whether it will eventually be able to branch out and become a global entertainment franchise. Then I have a very big but, not a rear end, but a, the negative. Then we get the rear end, then we get the end game, which is what happens at the very end when we branch out into other media. That was the wrong button. Okay, so if we start with who we are, Nordisk Film Games invests in game studios. So far, only Nordic ones, but I think we're pretty open to others if the right one comes along. We've invested in 4 companies within the last year. So there's Flashbulb Games, who are in early access now with Trailmakers, which is like a Lego build-your-racer machine sandbox game. Avalanche Studios, who have done the Just Cause and the hunting simulator, and so on. Kogama, which is a more social version of something like Roblox, where the kids can make their own games. It's a game-making platform. And Heroes and Generals, which has the claim to fame that it's the first game ever to really get the strategic general layer to work with the man-on-the-ground shooter layer. So you have the generals assigning resources to the shooters, and the shooters shouting angrily at the generals for more tanks and so on, which is, much like life. And Nordisk Film Games is basically spending Egmont's money. Egmont owns TV stations in Norway. They have a Nordisk Film, which is a film studio. Egmont Publishing doing books and magazines and online sites and so on. Nordisk Film is the oldest film studio in the world and the most Oscar-winning non-Hollywood company in the last 10 years. And they also manage big brands like Minecraft and so on. This is the boss. The surplus goes to children. So that's another good reason to bring these stories to life. My own story, very quickly, is that I started out studying film and media. Before that, I played a lot of computer games and Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. When I came out, I made a company making basically stories for learning and entertainment on the internet and started experiencing this whole IP challenge of how do you bring together gameplay, new technology, stories, characters, and all these things. And in 2009, I got the chance to pursue an old artistic dream of mine, which was basically to make a game and direct it, of course, that mixed film and gameplay. And I'm going to show you the first 3 minutes of that. Because it really illustrates quite well the difficulty of bringing together all these different media when people have to talk to each other across filmmakers and game makers and programmers and writers and all these things. If it works. Yes.
In 1975, toward the end of the space race between the United States of America and the USSR, an astrophysicist working at the Peterson Institute named Ingrid Hansen made what she believed to be the greatest discovery of the 20th century and possibly of humankind. It was built into the smallest pieces of matter floating through space, but this discovery was quickly buried by the Peterson Institute's managing director, Gustav Peterson. In spite of its gloried history as one of the world's leading scientific bodies, the Institute kept the knowledge of this find secret for over 4 decades. Until now.
Kathleen.
Okay, this is the first journal marking the beginning of the cloud chamber experiment. My father has finally agreed to let us work inside the Institute to explore the phenomenon we've discovered. Also, I've persuaded Max to bring his work over to the Institute.
I pulled it through that antenna directly from the atmosphere. It has all the components of a signal.
I've also brought on Thomas, a young documentarist.
Why is the Institute using me to make this documentary? What's the point of it?
What we're doing is classified and protected under national law. We traffic in state secrets.
I know that I'm feeling exactly what my mother felt while she was still alive.
She got herself killed. Don't follow in her footsteps. Follow in mine.
My name is Thomas Roberts. I was part of the team Kathleen Peterson assembled, hired by the Institute itself to record her work. All of the material from the project comes from my own recordings and research, but the Institute owns it. It's illegal for me to publish or broadcast it. What is Gustav Peterson and the Peterson Institute so afraid of? What are they hiding?
I don't want to be filmed.
Who killed Ingrid Peterson? What is it they found? What's Kathleen hiding? All the information needed to help uncover the mystery of Cloud Chamber has been uploaded here.
It has all the components of a signal.
This database has one sole purpose: to make it impossible for governments and corporations to continue hiding the truth from the rest of the world. To make the database accessible for everyone, the information is presented using a landscape metaphor. Remember, the more important the data, the higher the island.
Where'd they start, Tom? They already have.
So I think we were only about 10 years too early. The main gameplay was discussion, so you were discussing your way through this found footage. And the core game players really loved it, but this was basically an art game. But we learned an awful lot about mixing media, marketing innovations, and all these things. My next game is going to be Donald Trump Goes to Russia. So let's get to the hardcore stuff. 6 tests for your IP. So I think you really need to pass these 6 if you want to have your game become an IP at the other end of the line. The first one is you have to survive. It's not going to make itself, and we're not going to make it for you. So by the time a big media company like Egmont gets interested, you've already funded it. And you've basically proved that you can stay above the water, at least pretty much on your own. But of course, we all know that we get this story all the time. We get this story of these successful entrepreneurs who are just surfing the wave and it just works and they just know what they're doing. The truth is, most of the time, it ends like this. So there really is a million ways to die, just like there is in any entrepreneurial endeavor. The 2 really big ones are that we all tend to get tunnel vision, and I know from experience that this is true, which is that we get so focused on these damn projects and all the fires we have to put out every day to get it across the finish line that we lose sight of what happens just after the project is finished, and the long-term view, just forget it. We have no time for that at all. And that's really deadly because, of course, once you launch the game, the game company have a tendency to fall off a cliff. The second really big killer is the belief that this project is special. And it isn't. I'm sorry. We think that this one is going to take off. We think it's going to be the surfer catching the wave and so on. But you know, the truth is that 999 out of 1,000 projects don't catch the wave. The problem is we don't hear about them. So we have to stop thinking of this project as special. We have to start being cynical at the same time as we are inventing it and being passionate about it. Because being special stops when you meet the investor. Actually, I'm not thinking about me, I'm thinking about the other guys in Nordic Film Games. Because they have this stare. This is actually the governor of the Bank of England, but I just love the way he looks at you. Because he does not think you're special. He is looking for red flags, and he doesn't see very many green flags in the games industry, honestly. So that brings us to test 2. Your game project has to have real long-term potential, even though it's working now. So I tend to look at things like this. Where is the long-term strategy for this company? It's not enough that you're going to make another game. It's a really bad sign if you're starting from zero with your next game. So we're looking for people who are building experience with the same audience and the same business model and the same universe and so on. We need to see some separation of the creative from the commercial. If the CEO is also the creative director, that's a huge red flag, because all the decisions that are not tied into his passion will be second priority, and that's a problem. We're not too keen on games that can be sold in boxes anymore. As I'm sure you know, we're looking for games that can become hobbies over the long term and that can keep earning money. We're looking for founders that understand that they need audience contact from day one. And we're also looking for game concepts that can do that. So if you're making a story game, which a lot of Danish companies are doing, and you cannot show anything until it's 100% finished, then I'm sorry, we're not going to get into bed with you, because the chances are that once it's 100% finished, not many people will like it, and it's too late to change it. And then finally, which brings us to the IP, there needs to be something to own. Can you own the characters? Can you own the audience? Can you own the technology? And can it cross into other media? It's not necessary for us that it can from the start, but we have to see the potential that it can over time cross. And then of course this one, please don't do that. Don't wait with the business development until after the product is almost finished. This is a classic thing in all business, all indie businesses, film business as well, but it's very dangerous. But of course, if this works, I'm sure we'll figure the rest out. If people love it and it keeps spreading, then I'm sure we'll figure the rest out. Test number 3, it needs to stand out in the market. If it's, you know, medieval knights looking a lot like medieval knights, it's going to be difficult for people to recognize it. So we need something that when you look at the shelves, even the virtual shelves, you can see it, it stands out, it has its own style, visual style, whatever. Features are really not something that sells a game. You all remember those game boxes from the 1980s? On the back it said 80,000 polygons, and you know, all this technical stuff. And then game features are kind of like that. You know, massively multiplayer is good, but it's not something that sells games except to other developers, which is really dangerous, that you get sort of lulled into this belief that it's great because the guys you drink beer with think it's great. And having a clear theme is also something that makes you stand out, and it lays the foundation for a story universe. Is it about, you know, the sorrow, or is it about repression or something like that? It's not something that sells in itself, but it is something that can help to make it distinctive. Test number 4, we need a world. This can be tricky. So this is not actually asking for a story. This is asking for a world where stories can happen. And if you look at something like Nintendo's Hyrule, where all like Breath of the Wild and so on, all those adventure games happen, then you basically have a stage where many stories can happen. And then you have something that can travel to other media. What doesn't travel is interpersonal drama. So, you know, we know it from film, and the Europeans, we're very good at it. People's internal emotions and conflicts with specific other people. That's really difficult to move between media. It's especially difficult to make a game out of it. But worlds you can do, and if you have a world, then as you address each medium, you can build that story on that medium's specific strengths. And that is something we can use. World builders are at a premium. Then we need characters. Now, there's only one slide here because it's really simple. When you're doing stories, and most media do want stories, we want to put our emotions into the story. And if there's no characters, then it's very difficult for us to place our identification inside the story. So this guy, Mega Man, is perhaps a little bit too primitive in his realization for us to identify with him. But if you look at something like Lara Croft, or you look at the Thief's End, or so on, then you have characters that you can believe in. And then you can have something that can potentially get a good writer interested in writing a book, or we can get a director interested in making a movie, or so on. And of course, if you have something protectable, that's even better. Then this one, which is something that we've just recently put on our stone tablet of things that need to be there, is basically the sincerity of craftsmanship. And it kind of, I don't know, it's kind of complicated, because what is the sincerity of craftsmanship? Well, it's, you know, it's the truth in the art. It's the fact that these people who have invented it believed in it passionately, and it has that ring of something real and true. And we all know it when we see it. It's in great music, it's in great books, it's in great games as well. And it's not calculated in the, how do I say, moment of invention. And that's actually quite difficult, because of course we want something that can be effectively marketed. But the internet and everything else is just becoming a huge bullshit detector. And if you're bringing out something that's inherently false and calculated, unless you have a huge media pressure, which is going to be incredibly expensive, then it's going to be difficult. You need that true spark of genius at the center. And you need to keep it going all the way down the production line to the different media. See, I told you it was a big but. The but here is that even if you have all these things, you still have to have a hit. We're not, as Egmont at least, and Nordic Film Games, we're not able to take something that people don't want and then make people want it. So you have to have all these things, but you also have to create the basic success. And that's a bummer. But if you get there, then you get to the end game. And the end game, of course, is to, for us at least, is to take the central characters, central storyline, central experience, and fold it out, unfold it to all these other media. And that really brings me to what is the challenge that we are working with across all these channels right now, which is number one, respecting this sincerity of craftsmanship, both from the original work, but also the sincerity of craftsmanship necessary to make it work in the new medium. And this is a really big cutoff point, because we all know, I mean, when did we see a computer game made into a good movie that we wanted to see many times? I can't remember one. And that's a real challenge. It's a real challenge to get the creative sparks in other media to go so deeply into the original property, and then to go so deeply into their own property that what comes out becomes something lasting, true, and good. And that's really, I think, the challenge for the next many, many years, at least where I'm sitting, is to get that to work. And one of the things standing in the way of that is that film people and game people, they don't talk. Let's face it, they can't talk. They don't get up at the same time in the morning. They don't drink beer in the same places. Even if they did, they wouldn't, you know, they wouldn't recognize each other, and the conversation would end quickly and so on. Trust me, I've tried it many times. And there's a real, I think it's getting better, but the situation we're in is that we have to run from one domain to the next and bring the gifts from the next back over to the third, and then bring the gifts back to the fourth, and then slowly get it made better and better. Because if we put them in the same room, the film people win every discussion. Because they're all out of theater and they're used to winning the room. But they're not right all the time. And then, 2 weeks later, one of the programmers says, hey, it's not going to work because X. It's like, couldn't you have said that before? Yeah, but the guy was winning the room, So there's some real challenges here, both in the personalities and the language and the value sets and the goals and all these things in each of the media. And that's basically what I find fun. And then finally, of course, the financing, development, and distribution processes of each of these media is very, very different. I mean, just looking at the film where everybody's coming out of performance and everything is focused on that short shooting period, and up to it we have one very specific process, and after it we have another very specific process, is nothing like making a game. Nothing. Where you can, basically build your Lego and you can rebuild it and rebuild it and rebuild it all the way. Completely different way of thinking. And the whole industries are structured differently, where the game developers are hired, have a job, come to work every day, and the film people are artists, and they're, basically traveling, joining different traveling circuses and flitting from one to the other. It's a completely different life. So it's interesting. And finally, of course, when all this works, it comes down to the story. It comes down to, and yeah, I'm sure you know what a story is. You start with a bang, you save the best for last. I like to use The Fugitive as an example, where we start with Richard Kimball. He's got a beard, so you know he's nice. He comes home and his wife has been murdered, and he is sentenced to death. And in the first peak there, he's driven up to be executed in the bus, and the bus flips over a cliff, and a train hits it, and he gets away. And at the red spot, Tommy Lee Jones comes in, he says, we have a hard target. I want a search of every outhouse, in-house, hen-house, doghouse. Go get him. And the story starts there. And we know that this story is not going to finish before these two guys figure it out. Either the doctor clears his name, or the policeman catches him. And originally in the 50s, I think, this was a TV series. And there was 42 episodes from the first red spot to the second red spot. And that's the story. And let's face it, that's what works in most media. Thank you.
So now we will be taking questions. Thank you very much for this. There was very sound advice in there as well. I like to ask the first question, actually. I mean, there are lots of things you have to think about in order to build up your IP. What would you advise on to start with? Do you start with the world or with the characters? I mean, most of the people here, they're not Ubisoft. They're smaller teams, 10 people, and they ask themselves, well, we cannot look at everything at once. So what would your advice be?
I think I would. I don't think I would start there. I think I would start by finding a game mechanic that was fun enough and proving that it was fun, and then I would think about the characters. Because the character, I mean, look at something like Shovel Knight, for example, or Super Mario. It's not that expensive to design a character, and yet that has a very good chance of becoming the thing that everybody identifies with your game. So I think I would start by building and testing the gameplay. And then I would start bringing in the character and seeing if I can get the same audience to enjoy the character and the gameplay. And then I would build from there, start thinking about the world.
Any questions from the house? There will be a microphone.
You said that there's sincerity of craftsmanship. I think that's really important. But that, if that goes with feeling special, isn't that a conflict? So where would you say that the craftsman who sincerely believes in his work and that he has something unique does not consider him so special that he can look the Bank of England guy in the eye and say, I'm not special?
Find a partner. A partner, a business partner. I mean, of course there are, genius people out there who can do both. I just haven't met any, basically. So yes, I would say find a partner. And this is a really big challenge for the games industry because the people who go to business school think games are toys. So finding somebody who's actually good at business, who will be your partner in something that at the beginning is an artistic endeavor, that's tough. But I think you need to do it. I think you need that balance, and they need to be partners. The idea of the creative genius owning all the shares and the business partner being an assistant, that's not going to work, because then all the decisions go one way. And then you end up in that black sheep trap.
There is a question back there, please. Microphone's approaching.
Thank you. Lena Falkenhagen, having worked in the industry for 6 years and in the book market in Germany, I have the distinct feeling that the sincerity of craftsmanship is in desperate need of being saved by somebody. So in Germany, I have a feeling that money and, of course, business matters always go first and influence the decisions, the creative decisions, and how the games are developed in the book industry too, by the way, not the development of games, of course. But how do we do that? How do we save that sincerity for the industry?
I don't know.
Have you suggestions?
Well, it's always been a war between, the bean counters and the crazies. It's always been a challenge that you have to go to church and the bank all the time. You have to be able to do both. And I think if we want, we have the same problem in Denmark, except in Denmark, we only focus on the art. There's no focus on the money. So we end up having prize-winning, like Cloud Chamber, prize-winning projects that are very far-sighted but don't earn any money. So maybe we should get together, the Danes and the Germans, and maybe we can work something out. But honestly, it's a huge challenge. The problem is that it's so difficult to manage something that you can't even really understand yourself. We all know it. If you try to recruit people, it's very difficult to recruit somebody and understand if they're any good if you can't do what they can do just a little. So I think maybe that's the solution. The people managing the artists need to get into it, even if they need to understand the basics of that craftsmanship. And I'm sure many of them do, but I think that's where it usually jumps off. But it jumps off on the other side as well. The chain jumps off, because the artists don't give a shit about the business. So the dialogue just breaks down immediately, because no, I don't want to talk about money. I want money, but I don't want to talk about it. That's not really very productive either. So both parties, we need to build some common understanding, but we don't want to lose what's good on both sides. Education, maybe?
Is it maybe like public funding of prizes, or prizes like you said in Denmark?
Public funding of what, sorry?
Computer games, achievements, prizes, like the computer games.
Either that, or we just need to get these people into the same room and put enough beer in there. That always helps. We need to...
The Danish solution.
Isn't it? It's a short-term solution, I know, but one of the things we've been looking at is, can we do workshops where we bring together different sectors and we force them to build projects, no matter how bad, because it's really about beginning to understand each other's processes. But of course, the higher level you get, the more difficult it is for people to have time. I don't have an easy answer, I'm sorry.
Of course not, thanks.
Hi, my name is Christian. First of all, thanks for sharing. I've got a question related to when you intend to branch out to other media. Is there a sort of a beacon media where you say, okay, that's a media that we usually use as test ground, as playfield to check out if there's potential for building up an IP?
Yes, but I wouldn't think of it so much as testing the commercial potential, because that should be proven in the original. But we do think of TV series as testing the creative potential. Because if we can get it to work as a TV series concept, then that puts enormous demands on character, storyline, mood, the broadness of the appeal. All these things need to work before you can think of a TV series. And it also means that the universe has to work, in repeated episodes. And that means that you can also do books. It doesn't mean your books will be good, because you still need genius writers every time, and you need them to get personally invested in the project, and that's difficult. But I wouldn't start with a book, because a book does not guarantee that you can do a TV series, because it could be enormously interior and so on. But a TV series, you can pretty much do anything after that.
It's quite a hefty budget, but thank you.
But you don't have to make it.
That's smart.
You can just conceptualize it, and if it's believable, then in principle, you should be able to unfold it in other media.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah, you don't have to make it. There's one over here. We are making it, but...
Hi, my name is Jasmine. The problem that I see with branching out to many different types of media after having made a game, be it film, books, merchandise, is that of brand dilution and losing control over your brand, and perhaps losing the strength and the effectiveness of the brand also in producing or enabling many different types of media to be sold. How would you deal with that? Control. I mean, you're right, that's a real danger, but that's, I would say that's a process danger. It's a little like saying, why should we make a game? There's a good chance it will be bad. Because most games are bad. We only see the really successful ones. And what you're pointing at there is that, yes, there's a risk that the TV or other media process will also go bad. So you have to trust the people you're working with, that's for sure. Where would you draw the line? When does it become too much? And where do perhaps the dangers begin outweighing the potential benefits? I think you're going to lose control of the property way before that point. I mean, at some point you're going to have to let the baby go, I think. The talks we've been having with Hollywood, it's very clear that if there's too many demands for control at the origination point, then the funding for a TV series will never appear. Because these people down here, Netflix or whoever they are, will never go into a deal where the original computer game makers can say yes and no to everything. They're not going to give you script approval or anything like that. They might give you approval of key creatives, like the showrunner, the main writer, or something. And that's really your lifeline, is that if you can get the right to say yes and no to the people who run the show, and you can make sure you trust them, that's as good as it gets, I think. Thank you. Because that's really, from our talks with Hollywood, that's really, it's a huge issue, control. Because once the TV or movie machine starts rolling, it's so astronomically expensive that, if somebody is sitting back in Denmark or Germany or wherever can just say, no, stop, and you've got, 3,000 people on set going, what? That's not, that's their worst fear. And of course it'll break their career, so they'll never say yes to that. So you get, there's an old Victorian housewife advice, which is just get good help. That's it. Make sure you get good help. You need people you can trust.
So one last question. They're in the middle, please.
Hello. You mentioned the problems between game developers and filmmakers, so to say. But are we talking here with convergence that we are telling the same story across all media, or that we expand the universe in all media with different stories? Because then we don't have this problem, I think, because game developers manage to make a game with a story maybe with 40 hours of playtime, and filmmakers need to tell a story within 2 hours or 3 hours, and I think that's the difference. Sorry. So, what's your opinion about that?
I think it's true. You're right. But it is, I mean, it's a challenge because, I mean, my favorite game is Bloodborne. I don't know if you know it, Dark Souls, yes, and Bloodborne and those things. And it has a very, very, very specific tone. And I think I would recognize anything, if you made a Bloodborne movie, I would sit there going, ouch, ouch, every time something was not, you know, completely spot on. But, you know, from what I hear of the Miyazaki, the Japanese auteur who made Bloodborne and Dark Souls, I don't think he hangs out with film people, you know? I think that the people who would really need to understand his tone would have difficulty talking to him. Mm-hmm. And therefore, it's not necessarily about the universe. It can be just about, you know, do you get it? And that's a big challenge. And we're approaching some of these projects now where we're going to get to the point soon where we have to put these people in the same room. And it's going to be an interesting experiment.
So one good example, I think, is the Deus Ex universe. We have different games from it. We have different comics. We have books. We have short movies, so to say. And they are all telling a different story and not the same. So, yeah.
But that's great. And I haven't actually seen them. But if it works, it's brilliant. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying these are the challenges that we're working with.
Okay, thank you.
Of course, it's not impossible.
Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Christian, for educating and entertaining us at the same time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Meine Damen und Herren, wir haben als nächsten Speaker auch jemanden, der sehr, sehr viel Erfahrung mitbringt. Das ist ja auch ein Thema hier der Hamburg Games Conference, dass wir versuchen, alte Hasen zu verbinden mit Leuten, die sagen, relativ frisch in den Industrien sind und hier gemeinsam ins Gespräch zu kommen und gemeinsam voneinander zu lernen. Michael Geidel, sehr erfahrener Produzent, seit 20 Jahren im Business, Produzent für Film und Games, in verschiedenen Bereichen gearbeitet, TV-Lizenzierung, Merchandising, internationale Koproduktionen, EMTV, Kirch, also sozusagen auch ZDF Enterprises bei großen Unternehmen und auch international unterwegs mit Stationen in Toronto, Los Angeles, Brüssel. Also jemand, der sozusagen einen breiten Blick hat, sowohl auf die Industrien als auch auf das, was sozusagen sich international bewegt. Er ist Analyst und Konzepter für Transmedia an der Filmuniversität Babelsberg und er betreute bei Kinowelt langjährig Arthouse und Hollywood-Filme. Mehrere Filme, interaktive Formate entwickelt und Webdokus. Und er ist sozusagen sein lebendes Beispiel, wie man diese Konvergenz von Film und Games in Projekte umsetzt. Und ich bin sehr, sehr gespannt, was er uns heute sagen wird. Und zwar ist sein Thema vom Album zum Buch, Film, Game und vom Film zum VR-Game. Also ein entsprechender Rundumschlag. Freuen Sie uns alle auf Michael Geidel. Ja, ist das der richtige? Ja, da ist, glaube ich, noch einer. Ich weiß nicht, ob das derselbe ist oder ein anderer.
Ja, das war eine Ankündigung. Geht das Mikro? Hallo? Ja. Ah, okay, super. Yeah, thanks a lot for the introduction. Quite something, but I'm still a human and I'm living. I'm glad I am. I would have loved to just, continue talking and discussing because there are so many things that you said that I would just like to, continue discussing with you. But let me just go through these couple of slides here first, and then we can, discuss all of these things. Briefly, just something about our company. Yes, 20 years kind of is true, but not into games, sadly. So actually, I did not study film. It studied something in between. So I already had a background from, being a student and from research later on at the Film University that, covers not just film, but also interactive and games. But that didn't really prepare me a lot of doing both. And it seems like, as you say, it's complicated being a film and a game person at the same time, and putting, you know, the two of them in the room requires beer. That's kind of true, and we tried that, and it kind of works as well. But of course, that's not the solution. So we got a couple of titles here, and we're also doing, you know, VR and AR stuff since a couple of years. And just to give you some impression about the logos, so there's on the left, there's obviously film logos, and on the right, there's obviously, you know, game logos. But interestingly enough, the left side, you know, pushes into the right side, because even Kann, you know, since 2 years, they have a section called Next, and that is, you know, covering games and interactive stuff, and Berlin as well this year. So they have a big and growing VR section, which is nice. However, on the right side, I haven't seen anyone, you know, at Gamescom talking about film so much. So maybe, you know, being a more kind of a filmmaker in your heart at this point, I would say, you know, why not, you know, why don't the games people, you know, try to go more and understand more of the film people? They do at some point. And as the pockets get deeper, you know, that of course is in the interest of the film people as well, as we both struggle. But creating own IPs, original IPs, or adapting IPs from one to the other is something quite challenging, and I will be discussing this with you later on. But I have 2 examples here, and interestingly enough, this is also a Nordic example, because that's a co-production with Sweden. And it's an original IP that actually comes from the music industry. So there was a record firstly done by a quite famous jazz band in Stockholm, and they created a record for kids. First, you know, especially for kids, a jazz record, and they created also a children's book. And actually, I have it with me if you want to have a look at it later. I have it with me, and we're also looking for a publisher for Germany for the book. So if there's lots of publishers here in the city, so if there's any interest, please give me a shout out. This project is something that started probably 6 years ago. So as you can see, things can take long, and also production-wise, it's really hard to do things side by side, doing a film production and a games production, because not just is the financing different and the production and the team is different, also how long it takes is quite different. And it's quite challenging when you consider, you know, independent financing of a film and of a game. They can, you know, take shortcuts, or it can take longer, so it's quite tough to predict or to try to launch a game and a film at the same time, so a day-and-date launch. Only the big ones, like the Batmans, and so they can really do it, but even they, in the past, were not able to deliver at the same time, because there's just so many things that can go wrong in a film production and in a games production. So this is there's an IP that's an original IP, so it's their own, created with an English artist and the jazz band. So everything is based actually on the record and on the drawings. And then there was a lot of different things that we made out of that. There was, of course, the book and the record. Then there was a TV series that was commissioned, and it's going into 2nd season now. And there was the digital app and the games that we really came into play. And of course, there's interactive concerts. So those things, as you discussed before, you know, losing control, trying to keep control or letting it go, that's really difficult if you have, let's say, a showrunner or, like, let's say, director who feels this is his baby and he wants control over everything. But let's say he's a filmmaker, doesn't know much about games, but he wants to have final control over everything because it's his baby, also in the game side. Then it really becomes challenging. That's a similar, you know, discussion. It doesn't really matter if you outsource, if you license it to a third party to do a game, or if you do it internally. The battle is kind of the same. There's less legal battle, but there's still a battle on the, you know, content side and on the conception side. And this is the book. You have a chance to have a look at it later on if you like. This is the TV series. there's 13 tracks on this record. And for each of the tracks, there is a distinctive animation, a short animation, a really nice story of two animal friends. It's very positive. There's no dialogue, but there is, you know, they overcome hurdles, they help each other. It's really, really nice for preschool. And it's been a really big success. Both the book has been a really, really big success in Sweden and in France, and the TV series as well. Yeah. So next thing is the film. So there was also a film made out of kind of, not the best of, but kind of made from the TV series, and it was submitted to Berlin, and it was happily accepted in Berlin last year. And so we had kind of a test crowd for the film, which was quite nice, actually, to see all these screaming young kids and their worried adults, parents, you know, sitting in a room saying, no, don't shout, it's a screening, you know. But, you know, of course, kids don't care, so they cheered up when, you know, their favorite animals, be it a hippo or the elephant, you know, had a fun time on screen. And also, we used that occasion to talk and, you know, get feedback for the game. Would you like to have a game for that? You know, how could that be? How could that work? And interestingly enough, the kids were much more interested than the parents. So, which comes back to the conclusion and that in terms of media usage, parents quite often still, you know, would allow their kids, or, you know, say, you know, yeah, let's have like 10 minutes of screen time of television each day, or I get you the iPad and you can watch, you know, your favorite series. But game, that's when, you know, their parents quite often, you know, get a little bit more reserved, and kids don't. So that's kind of a little hurdle we had. But interestingly enough, we then created also 13 games. So for each episode, for each track, we create a game. And of course, that's kind of a challenge, but it's a casual, small little game, so it's not really, you know, very complicated. We were looking for mechanics that for that target group and for that story world or story universe, how you would call that in the old term of transmedia, how would that work, and how would it be fun? Of course, we want it to be fun. It's for kids. And that was kind of going back and forth quite some while, and that was way after the television series was made. That was really way after that. So we were never intending, because we knew we wouldn't be able to release that at the same date. And that's some of the concept, because of course it's a jazz band. It's a famous jazz quintet. They toured through the world. You know, they got really lots of awards for what they do, and they of course do interactive concerts. So they use also their concerts, sold out stages all throughout France, to promote what they do, including the book, including the series and all of that. And that's something, of course, that I think is a very positive aspect of using, you know, using one IP to different mediums, because it all connects to kind of the same target group, but then again, you know, to a different side of it. Because that's something you would never achieve if you say, you know, we just rely on television, because people who go to a concert are a different group of people, mostly. So there's overlapping, and it wouldn't be a congress, a conference, and I wouldn't be trying to buy into your hearts, but not into your pockets, if I were not to give you a little bit of free, you know, gifts. So if you Google, or if you go into the Play or Apple Store, then you'd be able to download the games from today or tomorrow, depending on, you know, when they actually release it, until next Monday for free. So you'll be saving a lot of money if you want. Of course, be really great if you, and all of the audience down there, if on Facebook and YouTube, be also, you know, reviewing, giving us feedback, you know, what you like, what you don't like, how we can further develop it, because of, you know, we're all learning. We started being a game studio maybe 3 years ago or something. So we're quite small, and we would have never probably been able or had the courage to found our own game studio that does nothing else than that, because being an indie studio nowadays is getting quite complicated. Next thing, that's a project that's going on for even longer. It all started in 2014, where with the idea of taking one of these social interesting topics nowadays in our society, be it civil courage or how do we deal with the Holocaust and tolerance in our society, and put that into something that will move and educate people. And so we found a Holocaust survivor, quite famous lady, Charlotte Knobloch, who is a big ambassador for the cause and is very open and demanding also new forms of media to remember and to activate and get into touch with the young people, especially for this topic. So what we did, we created a short film, because short films are really great for schools and for education, and we created a DVD together with Matthias Film, which is a German distributor, especially for educational purposes, and with lots of material for teachers and all of that, to distribute in schools and for educational events. And then we thought, well, our target group, yes, they do watch films, but what else do they do? Of course, they play games. So well, I was too fast, but this is just what other reason. So this photograph probably everyone knows, right? Or many of you probably know. This young boy back then was or is hopefully still alive. Most of the Holocaust survivors are not very long, or most of them are not alive, anymore. But in education, and not just in Germany, but also in the US and other countries, first, witnesses' stories are key for education. Because in the end, it's very important for kids to listen to stories from people who have really, gone through all of that. And when that's missing, then there is a gap. And how to fill a gap? You can't fill a gap of a living person. So how can we get as close as possible in a way that's not yet been done before? A game. But if you tell to a publisher, hey, let's do a game about the Holocaust, yep, that's something a lot of people would probably not willing to invest in so easily. So of course it gets a little bit more complicated than what we did. So first was the short film. That was kind of our proof of concept. That was kind of, yes, there's the story world, there's the characters, there's a story. And then, of course, there was a song contest. So we did a little bit of PR and with the co-producing Bayerischer Rundfunk. And then we created a multiplayer online game that, doesn't really use the story world, which is something we probably can discuss on, but it kind of deviates from it, but uses the same topic and the same principles to teach about tolerance and civil courage. And then there's the interactive VR game, because we thought, well, what's the most immersive thing nowadays? What's in schools already through Google Cardboard? What's possible, and what's in museums, and what's hopefully going to be a future trend? VR. Everyone predicts, still. I mean, the curve's not as we all wanted, but still, the predicted curve for VR is quite interesting. And so that's the first short film we did. We did it in stereoscopic 3D. That was kind of a interesting thing for us, because we want to innovate in what we do. We didn't want to just do a short film, although that was quite challenging enough. We also wanted to do something new, because stereoscopic is also more immersive in some ways than a traditional flatty film. And the next evolution would be virtual reality. This is a screenshot from the browser game. It's actually the story of a class of, 20 people, a school class, that goes on a journey. In real life, it's 1 week, so it's homework. So this game is homework. You don't play it in school, you play it as homework. So everyone hates homework, playing games as a homework doesn't sound like such a bad idea, right? But the principles of how this ship is run by the captain and by the crew, and you being among the crew, is exactly how the Nazis actually built their system from 1933 on, how they treated people, how they treated minorities, how they treated Jews. So in the end, you'll be tempted into moral dilemmas. You have to decide, do you let someone go? How do you do to survive? How do you get to the next level? All of these things are in the game, without mentioning even that it's about, being a Jew or not being a Jew, about the Holocaust. Because if you say, hey, let's play a game about the Holocaust, and you're a Jew, then of course your way of playing is a little bit different, usually. You wouldn't be so free-minded to just do what you want to do. You would be, be historically predetermined what you're going to be doing. That's something we did, and that's the VR game that's in development. Also, thanks to a couple of funds, but let's talk about the thank yous later. And we thought, well, okay, VR is very immersive, and you have these controllers and all of that, but why did Oculus and Vive have a microphone, What is even more immersive? Is it, clicking like the text adventures on, ABC3, or is it, what else can we do? So we are developing a system that is able of you being in an adventure, commanding and guiding and walking through it with voice recognition and with gesture recognition. So if someone says hands up and you don't put your hands up in VR, like in reality, you probably get shot and you die. And there's many other things like that. So you really have a discussion with those people. And we hope, and our tests so far show, that is even more natural, because the UI in VR, using controllers to choose what you do next, is, let's say, not very natural. And we want to change that. Let's see. I mean, there's always a fallback. So if someone just, has a very strong accent like me when I speak English, then it's obviously also possible to, use text. And that's basically it. That was because I'm in Hamburg. I thought I'd bring up this photo, because that's from the premiere of Call Her Lotte, the film in Berlin, in the Zoopalast, together with some people you might know. In the middle is our protagonist, Charlotte Knobloch. And then, the one guy you probably know, that's me, just without a suit now. And then there is Willy Geike and Mr. Sommer and the ambassador of the US in Berlin. And of course, everyone knows the other person. So there's a lot of political will, so to say, to create educational material, serious games. There's a serious games conference in Hanover, and there's a lot of that happening, and lots of VR and games are made for education. So education is a big market, and as you said before, you also think that, education can be something that is worth tapping into. And that's when we talk about art versus business, and how to finance it. Because obviously also public funding bodies so far have, to weigh in between what to fund. Is it art? Is it, is it for education, or is there a market? Because if there's no market, if no one plays it in the end, okay, the same discussion like with public TV. Should they, think what should they, show or care what the ratings are? But I guess what I'm trying to get across here. It's really difficult, and we're still here, and I'm happy. So you should all try, to do something similar or even better than us. And that's basically it.
Thank you very much, Michael, and we're now having some questions from your side. Well, I'll start with one. There are lots of bits and different pieces to this transmedia puzzle. Do you have some umbrella project management tying it all together, or is it that you just start with one thing and find a partner so everything falls into place by chance, or is there some master plan behind it?
Well, let's say it's quite seldom that we have an idea and we say, well, that's perfect for multi-platform. That's a perfect IP to put games and everything else in. It usually starts from one side, be it a script writer coming to us saying, you know, that's a great idea, or ourselves thinking, you know, that's a great idea. We should think that through, and then afterwards we think of, okay, where to put it, and where else to put it. And of course, it's very different if it's in our own IP, and we prefer really using our own IPs or fresh new IPs. Although, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we've not yet worked so much with you know, buying into IPs, but now at MIP TV and in Cannes, there is
MIP TV is a fair where you can buy rights.
Yeah, MIP TV is like the biggest television affair next week, and they're not just doing you know, linear stuff anymore. And of course, series is a big thing. And it's interesting because when everyone was thinking and talking about series and how so much more important now the story world, or the world, you know, gets compared to film, where no one was really talking about worlds so much, I was remembered of, hey, series seems to be something like, as you say, a similar starting point on how you draw the first sketches compared to a game, in a way. Although mechanics don't play so much of a role when it comes to a series. So I would say it's really rare that, you know, something comes to us and it's natural fit for everything. Of course, there's
probably also tied to the money then. If there is public funding, I mean, we will be having games funding soon from the federal level. We'll see where that leads us.
I didn't want to get into that, but yes, of course. One of the reasons why, you know, it's really healthy for us still being a film production company as well is because funding for games should be really more in Germany. Look at our neighbors, you know. Yeah, that's my point.
Any more questions? There is one, please.
Yeah, you mentioned that, as I can assume, that it's hard to convince somebody to do a game about the Holocaust. And I wonder whether that might be just due to the word game. I mean, did you have any internal discussions about whether you present it as a game or an interactive experience? Because I could assume that many people would just directly think of that it has to be fun and it has to be entertaining and so on. Did you have any?
Yeah, well, the wording is very different depending on whom we talk to. So, of course, if we talk to a museum, we call it experience. And when we talk to educators, we call it experience. And if we talk to people who are really fond of games and understand very much more the depth of, you know, what a game can be and what a serious game means, then we call it serious game. Yeah.
Yeah, you wanted to tell us a little bit more about the thank yous, like where you got your funding from
sorry,
for various
yes.
things. No, second question. At what stage did you get, or at what point did you approach someone like Ms. Knobloch and Willy Geike?
Okay, well, the thank yous, sorry. Thank you for the game goes to Hanover. So Nordmedia does not also fund film, but also games. And they have a focus on serious games, which is quite interesting. And then also to the Leipzig Fund, MDM, they also fund games. And also Hamburg, and I think nearly every film fund in Germany now also has a game section. And at the European film market in Berlin this year, there was the Norwegian Film Fund, and it was the only fund I could find in the whole European film market who had on their banner also that they fund games. That was quite funny. So I think there is a move. There is, of course, it's a battle between budgets. All the film producers, don't want their money to go into games, and the game industry also want, a little bit share of that, cultural and state money. But that's basically a funding scheme. And then, of course, we are hoping so much that there is a federal game funding coming soon. And then there's lots of co-production. So most of our TV or theatrical films are co-productions with different countries. So New Zealand, UK, Sweden in this example, Spain, France. So there's many, many options. It's just a puzzle. And in the games industry, that's not so super common to do, but I've seen co-productions between Denmark and other Scandinavian countries, and I think even between Germany. So, and now since Scandinavia took a big place in Planegg near Munich with Koch, I hope that with THQ there will be more cooperation between the Scandinavian countries and Germany coming up. And yeah, and the other second question, Charlotte Knobloch, because it's kind of inspired by her life story. She was in from the very first moment, and thanks to her, we got a connection to Warner Brothers, and of course the cause and the message was very much to what also they believe in, and they thought they'd just help us, giving us a helping hand. That was really, really great, the job they did. Yeah.
One last question. Anybody? No? Thank you very much, Michael. Vielen Dank. Dankeschön. Michael Geidel. So, wir kommen von den ganz alten Hasen zu jemandem, der jung und frisch in der Industrie ist und einem Projekt, was sehr, sehr viel für sehr, sehr viel Rumor gesorgt hat. Und zwar möchte ich Ihnen Hans Böhme vorstellen. Er studierte von 2011 bis 2015 im Fachbereich Intermedia Design an der Hochschule Trier und beschäftigte sich da mit Film, Animation und Games und kam dann in Kontakt mit BTF, erstmal über ein Praktikum und ist dann immer weiter reingekommen und hat dann maßgeblich an dem Produkt Trüberbrook mitgearbeitet und wird uns heute etwas erzählen, was man von der Filmproduktion für die Gameproduktion lernen kann. Hans Böhme.
Hi, I prepared my presentation in German, but I tried to switch to English and do it on the fly. Sorry if I'm kind of stuttering in between, but I at least will try. Okay, welcome to my presentation, the workflows of Trüberbrook, and what you can learn about game development from movie productions. First, I'd like to show our Kickstarter story teaser to put us all on the same page about the project. I think it should come next.
You can imagine it as a rift, a junction in space-time. Your mind enters a stage of near transcendence, and suddenly, bam, you see a myriad of possibilities exploding right in front of you.
Beverly, you wouldn't believe what a charming little place they've sent me to. Feeling chilled out already. Hang on. What is this?
You have to see the whole picture. If I could just open your eyes.
What was your name again? Tenhauser?
Hello?
So you're from the States, right?
Well, I'm a physicist. I'm working on a text and I could really use some serenity.
This is puzzling. Who on earth would steal a paper on quantum physics?
There's a large network, like wormholes connecting different dimensions.
Tenhauser, these are ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. What are they doing here?
Your world is going to collapse. everything will collapse.
As if there was anything worth preserving in this rat hole.
Some people are scoundrels, others are not. Yes, that's how it is.
Wait a second. Am I pointing the wrong direction? So, sorry. Yeah, no, okay, sorry. I think I'm holding it the wrong way. All right, first I'd like to talk a bit about the backgrounds of the project and the company who's doing it. We're BTF, and I think most people, especially here from Germany, know BTF from Neo Magazin Royal. For all of you who don't know Neo Magazin Royal, it's with Jan Böhmermann, this guy in the middle. He's the guy who had a fight with the Turkish president Erdogan and kind of changed the law here and stuff. Yeah, and we're mostly doing movies and advertising and TV series. For example, Gute Arbeit Originals, which was a YouTube format, or Schulz und Böhmermann. We also recently did an exhibition about all the projects, so we were also like kind of going into new directions, and it didn't take us long to also explore the field of computer games. It all started off in 2015 and 16 when we published our first games linked to the Neo Magazin Royal. So they're set in the Neo Magazin Royal Cosmos, the game Royals. And yeah, they were just like funny little games, 40 minutes long, just to expand the Neo Magazin Cosmos. But in 2013, the author of the game, Florian Köhne of Trüberbrook, already started to dig a bit into the concepts and the story of Trüberbrook. First, we wanted to have Trüberbrook a little bit in a style like the Neo Magazin game, so in a retro pixel style. But the BTF and Florian himself had a lot of experience with scale modeling films and little stop-motion animations. So Florian, on the left side, you can see his bachelor thesis video concerning dinosaurs, where he like had this little animation video explaining stuff about dinosaurs. And also the BTF had a very early project, a movie called Änderungen, where we had like those dreamlike sequences, also filmed in stop motion and with scale models. So it was pretty clear at some point that this style would benefit our game. Right now we're having our base in Berlin, but the BTF itself is in Cologne. We're a very small team in Berlin, so only 3 to 5 people at its core. That's Flo at the left. As I said, he started the whole thing. He's the author, and he got us all together for this project. Simon is our programmer, and I'm concerned with all the 3D stuff and our special 3D pipeline. But we have like over 50 people working on the whole project, so we're getting a lot of help from Cologne, a lot of experience. I can't name them all, but it's Jakob doing the animations and the head of post-production doing all the color grading for our game, and so on. Here in the image you can see the Leah on the left, which is our producer, Leah in the middle, which did all the scale models, or she worked with her team on the scale models, and Benny, who did the character sketches, also those here. Yeah, and we kickstarted our project, or we started off with our project by getting a funding from the Medien Board Berlin-Brandenburg that kind of helped us to start the whole project and to build a few miniatures, test a few things. But this project is not very typical for stuff the BTF does, because most of the time we do advertising, we're getting the money in advance or doing it for ARD. or no, ZDF, sorry. There was also stuff done for ARD, but most of the things are for ZDF and ZDF Neo. And that's why we wanted to look in other models of financing, and we got to Kickstarter, which got us almost 200,000 euros and quite a solid base, quite a solid community. And that actually helped us to keep the financing stable for the project. Just to give you like an overview for the project, we're having a game that's kind of settled in between of classical adventure games, so all the old LucasArts and Sierra games, and more modern games like, for example, Life is Strange. So we're also having those inventory puzzles, for example, but we kind of streamlining them to have the experience more on the narrative of the game. We want to have the game be in between 6 to 9 hours of gameplay, and want to publish it for all the major platforms, so PC, Mac, Linux, and the consoles, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Switch. And we're developing that with our publisher, Head Up Games, so that we can spread this all at once. And one special thing about the game is, I think, that we are kind of having this genre mix between science fiction and mystery on the one side, and Heimatfilm, and I don't think there really is a translation for Heimatfilm, on the other side. Just to explain it real quickly, Heimatfilm is this concept of a movie being set in a local, in a regional area, very cheesy often, and we're mixing that with our sci-fi story. The biggest inspiration for this is, I think, Twin Peaks. Also, Flo said that. Twin Peaks at its time also had like those mystery elements combined with Heimatfilm motives. And there are also many other inspirations we have, for example, The X-Files or Stranger Things. And yeah, that's kind of where we're coming from. And they all have something in common. Most of our inspirations have something in common, and that is they're all set in a very restricted setting, in a very small setting. The setting is kept pretty small, and we get to know the characters, might it be in suburbs, might it be in small towns or in countrysides. We get to know the characters with all their strange features and also all their secrets. There are other examples for this. For example, True Detective, which is set in the States, in the south of the States. Or, for example, a very recent example is 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which also shows this very restricted area, and we got to know all the characters and how the town functions. And we wanted to have the same thing for our project. And Flo, very early in the production, noticed that this is a trend in movies, that we have many movies coming out showing those limited settings and telling stories in this setting. And I think this is one takeaway we can learn from movies, but I'll get to that later. The next thing is I want to talk about our very special workflows, or our very special main workflow, because we're not the first game trying to get scale models into a game and making them sets for a game, but we're having our very own workflow for that. So there was The Neverhood in the 90s by DreamWorks Interactive. They made photos of clay models and used that as levels. And the spiritual successor, Armacroc, also did this in 2015. This worked quite well. And there was also another project called Luminosity, and they even used like little film sequences for camera movement. But also basically the same idea. They had a backdrop of images and showed characters in front of it. Right now there's a game in production in Cologne called Harold Halibut, and they're also using scale models for their sets, and they're using photogrammetry to get all the little real world assets in their game. And we kind of have a workflow in between all of those, and that's why I'm showing you this. We came up with our very own workflow, and the thing is that we wanted to have, like on this slide, we wanted to have the real lighting and all the features real lighting brings with it And you can never achieve this, at least not right now, in all its detail with computer graphics. And that's why we wanted to have all the sets photographed. But at the same time, we want to have the freedom to have a smooth camera movement like the folks of Slowbros have in Harold Halibut. So we have like those two workflows for our 3D assets. One is for the characters and all the things that are moving. That's a pretty common workflow, the normal workflow for games. So we're 3D modeling them in high poly and low poly, texturing them, rigging them, and animating them. And later we're combining them with our sets. And the sets are the thing I want to talk about today because that's our real special workflow, and I will guide you guys through all the points listed here. So it all starts off with building the models. The models are built with a lot of passion and a lot of love by some people. I think it's 6 in total, maybe more. I don't want to say something wrong. One team is in Berlin and one is in Cologne, and it took us weeks took them weeks to finish the models, but they're very rich in detail, and I think it's quite worth it. And as soon as we have 3 or more models finished, we're starting to shoot them. And to shoot them means we're doing different kind of photos. So one thing is we're doing like those very scenical lit photos you can see on the left. So for most of the sets, it's only one photo from one point of view. For example, for this, the treehouse, we had more photos because it wasn't possible to capture the whole set in a sufficient resolution. So we had more than one photo, but for most sets, it's just one. And we're grading them, we're putting backdrops on them, and that's basically what you will see more or less in the game. And in the second pass, we're doing photogrammetry images, which is photographing the model from all sides, from as many angles as possible, in a very neutral setting, because black and white pixels don't really have information to scan it, and that's what we're using them for. We're putting all those images in a software called Capturing Reality, and there it calculates a 3D model for us, and that's why we need very neutral lighting, and that's why also we can't use the photos from before, because they have very harsh shadows, they have black areas, and that's not sufficient for 3D scanning. All those black areas in the shadow would basically be wrong in the scan. And that, for example, with the photogrammetry, that's a trend coming up in the game industry, and you see it more and more. It's commonly used for facial animation and characters. I think many people of you have seen the actors being surrounded by many cameras. That's actually photogrammetry. Here we're using it to have our sets digitalized, and that's also a thing becoming more and more common in computer games, for example, in the last Star Wars Battlefront and in the last Resident Evil, I think. And yeah, if we have this model scanned, we basically have it as a digital form, but it has more than, I think, 30 million polygons. And as many of you might know, this is not really what you can put in a game engine. And that's why we're retopologizing them. So for most parts by hand, for some parts we can do it with an auto-retopo. We're just taking the models and try to retopologize the edge flows so it doesn't have 30 million, but maybe 10 to 30,000 polygons. In the next step, we're calculating a camera, which has the exact same view on the 3D model as the camera in the real setting had on the real models. So this is a very important step, because if you have that, if you have like a digital view on the model, which is exactly the same than in the real world, and for the real model, you can basically project the photo as a texture. So here you can see for one set, this is like the town hall or the town place in the middle of Trüberbrook, and we're projecting the texture from one camera onto the mesh, and then we can bake it as a texture, and it's fixed with all the lighting in it. And as you also can see, behind those objects there are occluded parts. That means that there's no information in the image to cover those parts, so the stuff from the front is just projected on the back. You can see it on the right. And so in the next step, we're going into Substance Painter after we baked the textures. And here you can see one set from above. The left one is before, the right one is after it, and we're just stamping out the parts. We can do this because from the start of the project, we knew we have very limited range of camera movement, and we don't want to see the models from all sides. That's why we can do it. If you wanted to have a model which, for example, can be seen from all sides, you could just do more photos of it. So you could do like a triplanar projection from it, and then you could see the model from all sides. But for us, it was enough to just take one photo and stamp out parts that are behind those, because for most parts, our camera angles are the same than on the photos. And if we finish that, there's one more thing we have to do, and that's the very tricky part about our workflow, because all the lighting information is already baked into the sets. So if you ever baked a lighting, you know what that means in a 3D application. So we have all the information of lights and shadows already in it. And if a character stands in there and gets lit by real-time lights, he might cast shadows additional to the shadows in the image. So we're having a shader which basically has a second map in it, showing you can cast shadows here in the bright areas, and you cannot cast shadows here in the dark areas. And the bright areas also show which color the shadow can have. And so it's not overlapping. We're having basically the same shadow then in the images. And to round the whole thing up, we're just putting the characters in the engine, trying to match the lighting of the scene, placing 3D lights in the 3D space to match the characters as close as possible. And then we add a lot of post-production, so particle effects. As you can see in the background, we add water and backdrops. And that's basically how we build our sets. So here are a few screenshots. Here we added like those God rays coming from the window. And yeah, we also have some special scenes. As you saw in the video, there's this one scene where they're having the flashlights, and they're trying to seek stuff in the room. And for this, for example, we're taking multiple passes. So we have one dark pass, and we're having one lit pass with a light on the point exactly where the characters stand. And in the real-time engine, we're just uncovering the parts lit by the left image and just projected on the right side. So this is it's kind of real-time, but it's also baked, and it's two textures. And we're having many parts like that in the game. So we're not really having that one workflow. Most models share one workflow, but there are also special scenes where we need to find other solutions, for example. So what can you learn from our production? As I mentioned earlier, you can get to know trends very early. So when Flo noticed this trend of very regional settings, he also wanted to have that for Trüberbrook, and I think it's a very nice way to analyze what's going on in the media in total, but in films especially. And you can see, can I maybe take something away from my own game from this? And the good thing about it is that the analysis is much more precise than just saying, I want to make a game that's like Blade Runner, but just a game. And yeah, that's it. And we also noticed that you can experiment very, very well with workflows that are not used in games very often, but used in other media. And in our case, it was matte painting workflows. So the whole projection stuff is used quite commonly in matte painting workflows. And maybe you can, for your projects, also find other workflows not really used in games, but maybe in films, and create something new. And I think that's also where the spark of innovation can be. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Haben Sie Fragen? Deutsch, Englisch, wie auch immer. Da ist eine. Warten Sie, bis das Mikrofon kommt. Just wait for the microphone. Oder? Jetzt hört man sie nicht überall gleich laut.
Well, thank you for the talk, and that's a really impressive and scary amount of work you're putting into this.
Thank you.
Really impressive. How do you handle interaction with your environments? Like, we just saw the suitcase there. I'm guessing you'd probably interact as a player with that? How does that work?
That's a very good question, because that's the most tricky part in our workflow right now. Everything that's picked up and that's very prominent in the picture is also real-time lit, like the characters themselves. We have some parts that are moving, for example, leaves and trees, and if the movement is very subtle, you can just take the stuff that has baked lighting in it. But for all the stuff that is moving in the scene, we either have to trick or we have to do real-time lighting, like for the characters.
So who was the director? Where did he sit? And how did he communicate with the others?
The director is Flo, the author also. So he manages the whole project. And our office in Berlin is quite young, actually. We started it in May last year, and that's also when the production really kicked off. And we're communicating about a few platforms. We're also doing some stuff for Cologne in Berlin, so for the TV shows and the movies. And yeah, I think sometimes communication over those distances is quite difficult. But for most times, for example, we're having a lot of Skype conferences with the animator, and he's showing us progress really frequently. And it's working quite well. And very often also people come from Cologne for a few weeks of very intensive work together, and where we have to find out and figure out special problems. But I think in this big infrastructure the BTF also had before, it's working quite well.
One last question. Maybe two.
What would be the main age group you're making this game for?
I don't really think there is like this main age group, but there is a player group, and that's all those people who enjoy adventure games, especially the old titles. Because as you can see from the camera angles, it's also in totals, like the old Sierra games and the, for example, Monkey Island from LucasArts. And many gameplay parts are also inspired by the old titles. But it's just, Flo always says like it's just for people who like good stories. I think maybe that's a bit too easy, but basically that's it. So like, for example, Life is Strange. It's just people who want to have a good experience in stories and maybe a gameplay that's not too fast, but quite challenging at some points. But also, I think I can add something here, because at one talk, there was this girl coming up to us, and she was like, she had these big eyes, and all the stuff just fascinated her about the small scale models. And at this point, we also thought about maybe we could make a version for kids. So the game has some points which are more for adults. For example, the main character, whenever he's in his idle, he starts to smoke and then just throws away his cigarette. And maybe we're just changing that to a lollipop or something, and making a more child-friendly version.
It looks pretty impressive.
Thanks.
It's like Twin Peaks met Wes Anderson somehow. Can you tell us a little bit more about the gameplay? Because it's the trailer that we've seen was mostly as kind of a little movie.
Yeah.
And as a game maker, I would like to know more about how would you combine it and like integrate it with the gameplay there is.
Yeah, the gameplay is pretty much the adventure games gameplay from the old games, but infused with more modern stuff. For example, we have an inventory system, but it's kind of streamlined, so you cannot combine every object with every other object, because that would bring us an explosion of possibilities. And since we're having the character really talk about everything, that would make the workflow, or that would kill the workflow, that would make our work explode. And so we streamlined that a little bit. For example, when you're picking up some objects that need to be combined, you can click on the object in the world you want to combine it with, and it already shows you, for example, you can use this object, or this object, and maybe you can use those 3 objects at once to solve the puzzle. So I think we don't want the game to be too hard, like the old games that you just sit in front of the riddle for 2 or 3 hours and just cannot figure it out. We want to have it a bit more streamlined to let people and let players experience the story a bit more, because that's the focus, the world and the story.
So it's mostly about riddle solving, or is there also a dimension of making choices in the way of like...
There is one choice, more or less, at the end, but it's more about riddle solving and also having conversations with the people in Trüberbrook and like dialogue riddles and stuff like that. But yeah, as I said, it's mechanics from old adventure games. So yeah.
Any more questions? That was Christian.
Well, I'm just wondering about, those old games were made before the internet.
Sorry?
Those old games were made before the internet, and you couldn't Google the answer. So how do you deal with that? Every time I meet a problem, I'm like, oh. And then it's solved. Oh.
Yeah, I quite recently played Timbleweed Park, and actually I also had to Google a few things. But I think that's just play style, you know. If you're having a focus on experiencing the story, then it's totally fine to Google the riddles. But if you see it as more of a challenge, I think people who see a challenge in those riddles don't really want to Google the solution. They have a pride in solving it themselves and stuff like that.
And they have no willpower.
Yeah, the willpower. And I think for games like that, it's totally fine if you Google the answer. I mean, it's quite frustrating to sit in front of the same riddle for hours and not solving it, and the characters are giving you the same answers for hours. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Hans, for giving us this insight, and also thinking outside the box, looking at other areas to integrate things into game development. Thank you very much. Hans Benedikt. Ich darf Sie jetzt zu einem ganz wichtigen Programmpunkt einladen, nämlich zu unserer Pause, die unten stattfinden wird, da wo Sie sich akkreditiert haben. Wir möchten Sie gerne einladen auf Getränke und einen Snack und vor allen Dingen, dass Sie miteinander ins Gespräch kommen. Das ist ja ein ganz wichtiger Aspekt dieser Konferenz. Leute aus ganz verschiedenen Richtungen, machen Sie was draus, und wir sehen uns hier wieder um 16 Uhr mit 3 weiteren spannenden Vorträgen. Viel Vergnügen.